Welcome, everybody, to another Midwestern Marks live stream. Today, we are joined by the International Secretary of the American Communist Party and now High Bailiff candidate in his home county in Vermont. So, we're very excited to talk to Chris today. We're going to be reacting to the fallout from the election, of course. We're going to be talking to Chris about some of the things that he's been doing for the ACP around the world. And of course, we will talk to him about his glorious victory in the election for the highest office of the land, High Bailiff. So we'll get right into that after the intro.
High Sheriff Hazard is a hard man to be. High Sheriff is his only plan. He digs through pockets, takes what he can, for he's High Sheriff Hazard. He caught me one evening, and here's what he said: "You look like a Russian, you look like a red. And if you're fond of your skin and your head, beware the High Sheriff of Hazard." The answer is simple, the answer is clear. We all get together, ain't got nothing to fear. We throw the old bastard right out on his ear. Farewell to High Sheriff Hazard. High Sheriff Hazard is a...
All right, the bailiff is here. The bailiff is here. He's going to handle High Sheriff Hazard appropriately. Thank you so much, Chris, for joining us, brother. How are you doing?
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you both tonight.
Comrade, the deep state is already spreading misinformation, and there's comrades here from Argentina saying, Battle Cossack, thank you for the super chat, brother. I had told my mom about Chris, and she says he's not a real communist because if he was, he wouldn't have won. The deep state allowed you to win. What are your thoughts on that, comrade?
Oh, well, good thing the deep state hasn't infected here, rural Vermont, where the Green Mountain Boys are still holding high in the hills. So that's where our struggle is ongoing, just like Maoist People's War in the rural countryside, bombarding the headquarters in the so fail down. Maybe they won't fail again, but this time they let me slip through. So we're very excited and happy, even more so to hold them accountable for all the crimes and corruption that's been going on in our county, and I'm sure every county in the country with their and proper oversight.
Awesome.
Absolutely. That's what people don't get. I mean, the way that socialist politics or quote unquote socialist politics has been handled in this country is like just run presidents every 4 years, spend a bunch of resources on that, and just hope that because Americans look at the presidential elections as if it was a sporting event. I think, Eddie, you had a tweet about this yesterday. Hope to get some attention from that. And that's completely erroneous. We have to build on the basis of the communities that already exist, the communities that we're already a part of. And I think this victory is pretty heroic. Just 4 months into the ACP's existence as a party, it's already done something that I honestly can't remember the last Marxist-Leninist organization to do something like this in this country. And okay, Chris Helali is not the president of the United States. The red that will be taking over the executive office in January is not our type of red, but it's still pretty darn historic to win something like High Bailiff in the great Orange County in Vermont. But thank you so much to the comrade here for the $5 super chat. ACP Rising indeed. But Comrade Chris, how did you get it done? What were the sort of things you had to do to integrate yourself into the community to such an extent that even if some of the members of Orange County won't consider themselves communists, even some of those that voted for you, they nonetheless still had the trust necessary to say, my interests are represented much more thoroughly, much more completely by this Mr. Christopher Helali, who's a communist, but who represents me instead of by any of the other dogs of the establishment and the two-party duopoly. So how'd you build the movement that led to this victory?
First and foremost, the victory is not mine alone. It belongs to the over 12 comrades who spent 2 days in Vermont, especially the entire day yesterday from 5 a.m., some of them 4:30 a.m., all the way till 7 p.m., till polls closed, handing out thousands of postcards, speaking to farmers and working class people and people of all shades and colors and walks of life to try to explain the need to write me in as a candidate. So this election victory, which of course has not been called, but the numbers right now, we're 150 ahead. These comrades doing this great work. And I also want to say that on my side, elections like this are only possible for those who built roots in the community. If you have roots in the community, if you're involved in the community, if you are dedicated to the community, I've been in this county since 2018. And so I built a lot of relationships of trust, and I've been around and I know a lot of people and people know me. I ran in 2020, and that's just how it is. People get to know you, they get to see how you are as a person, and that's how you win ultimately.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think starting at the local elections is so smart too, because to win an election like that, you have to knock on a bunch of doors, talk to a bunch of farmers, and that was not just useful work by those comrades, but it was great training for them, in the future, training social skills, training with canvassing and political organizing, ingraining themselves in the community. So that's really cool.
Absolutely. And this is how it's going to be built. I think the strategy that groups on the so-called left have had is completely upside down. We start with one high bailiff and then we spread it to the other 15 counties in Vermont, and then we spread it to other states. And there's something quite beautiful about the fact that our strategy is very similar to an assumption that the first American socialists, the utopian socialists, had. Their idea was, we're going to build an ideal community, and the community is going to be so efficient, it's going to work so clearly and self-evidently for the people that everyone else is going to realize, okay, this is the path forward. And this is what we can begin to build in these local offices when we come in it, when we come into positions of power in them. And it's part of the general three-pronged strategy of the ACP. Develop the people's communist enterprises, develop your relationship and the bonds of trust with your community that are rooted in that community service, and the fact that you're winning people over, not through lofty words and fancy arguments, but through results. And then the last one, which is going to be a natural way of translating the former two, is the political work. And as you said, Chris, you couldn't have been able to achieve this victory without the work that you've been doing since 2018 for more than 5-6 years now.
No, absolutely. And I think one of the key things to understand, there's been a lot of people posting online as if it's a own that the position historically doesn't do anything. It doesn't do anything because people have taken advantage of the fact that it's a nice seat to have. It's a county-wide position. It's pretty high up in the hierarchy of positions, and they haven't taken it seriously in terms of serving the people, serving the masses. And so the campaign that I ran and what I said to the media over these past few weeks has been the high bailiff position historically hasn't been utilized to its fullest potential. And that potential is ultimately the potential of oversight over law enforcement, right? And so that was a big thing in the past 4 years that some people in some counties have basically said, let's use this position to serve the interests of the people in having oversight over law enforcement, how they're policing, how they're spending the taxpayer money, and ultimately what's going on behind closed doors that the people don't see. The public knows that there's corruption going on, but they don't have access. The books haven't been opened, and the doors to the sheriff's offices haven't been, laid bare so that everybody can see what's going on. So what I said I would do is, since my sheriff department has been so brutally corrupt over the past, not necessarily this sheriff, but the previous sheriff, money has gone missing, contracts haven't been fulfilled, and this is hundreds of thousands of dollars of taxpayer money. So what I have said to my fellow citizens and to the people of Orange County, I said, as high bailiff, usually nobody does anything, but let's hold some public forums. Let's hold the sheriffs accountable. Let's have a dialogue. Let's see what we can do to basically build the trust. Because if we can hold this position and say, okay, I'm a communist, but communists can hold other people accountable, and we can be held accountable by the public, by those who put us into office, this is a tremendous way to gain their trust. Then the next election, they say, yeah, the communist high bailiff was there for 2 years. We had public forums. They opened the books. People were held accountable for what they did. He's a fine, upstanding citizen, right? Instead, they want to say, oh, they went for low-hanging fruit. I don't see anybody else going for any of this fruit. If it's low-hanging, PSL should have 50, 60 of them. CPUSA should have had a whole bunch. City councilors, mayors, select board. But we don't see that happening. We see everybody focused on the elections that bring in the most amount of money and the most amount of publicity, whereas the local elections are where power is actually centered. And for those who remember the famous quote of Tip O'Neill, former Massachusetts representative, right? All politics is local, right? Chris Matthews of MSNBC formerly loved to say this quote, but that's the truth. The truth is that politics in the United States is structured in a way where the local still it resides there. The power resides there. That's the federalist structure that was so key and pivotal during the constitutional framing process and what ended up becoming our structure of government. And so I think that we should take that to heart, and our comrades in the coming election cycles should basically say, I want to serve my community in elected office, and I want to prove that communists are not just loud and on the streets, but can actually sit down with their fellow citizens of different political persuasions and figure out how to deal with local issues in a way that impacts the local community in the best way possible and gets the best outcomes and the best results. That's what we're going to do. And that's what I'm going to do as high bailiff. I'm taking this position very seriously. I've already held some conversations today with locals who have intimate knowledge of the sheriff's department. And once everything is finalized and the official results are in, we're getting to work straight away.
Beautiful. You know what? One of the interesting things, you mentioned that argument that the leftists are making online, and it's just pure cope, guys. If at this point you haven't realized that it's just these people coping with the fact that they hate us and they see our success and they have nothing else to do, it smacks them right in the face, so they have to cope and be salty about something. But it's so interesting because they say that position literally does nothing. But here's the thing, what's the name of the guy that I forget his position, but we talked about him last stream, Eddie. The guy that looks like a vampire.
Matthew Miller, the
Matthew Miller.
spokesperson.
Okay, this cat, Matthew Miller. They asked him the day before the UN vote on whether the U.S. blockade on Cuba should be lifted. They asked him, what do you think the U.S. is going to vote? And he says, I doubt we'll condemn ourselves. And what is the position of the High Bailiff? It's oversight. So is the overseer, who's a part of the system, going to condemn the system? Is he going to condemn the corruption of the sheriff and the whole system there? Of course not. But if you put a communist in the position of overseer, is he going to condemn them? Yes, because it wouldn't be him condemning himself. And communists, of course, have the discipline that when we're ever in those positions, we have the ability to self-criticize and condemn ourselves whenever it's necessary. But it's such a stupid argument to make. Oh my God, they haven't done anything. Yeah, of course. In the same way that the U.S. continues to vote in favor of itself when the rest of the world doesn't do that. But if you had a different entity capable of doing the oversight with a different set of interests, with the interests of the people and not just these corrupt politicians, you can actually do something.
Oh, absolutely. I think also when you're looking at these sort of races, you understand where the American people are at their core. You understand you understand what the average American deals with day to day, what the issues are at the local level. Of course, it's important to think about the national and international issues, right? These are pivotal. But also people live and work. Who's going to pave the roads? Who's going to deal with the trash? Who's going to collect the taxes? Who's going to have the fire and the rescue teams ready to go? All of these are local, right? All of these are local issues. So when you think about that, I mean, I'm always, of course, I'm international secretary for our party. I love the international stuff. I love the diplomacy. But at the same time, when you're looking even in international context, well, who paves the roads? It's not Xi Jinping that goes out there. The Central Committee in China is not paving roads. They delegate authority down the line all the way to the village level, all the way down to the municipal level and the certain neighborhood level. In Cuba, the barrios and the different communities, right, where you have CDRs, right? And they're all organized and structured in a way to enact the policies that come from the masses up and then from up down, right? This whole idea of democratic centralism. And I think that when we're looking at what's going on in this country, there's a tremendous amount of change that can happen on the local level as well. And so, yes, of course, some leftists say don't engage in bourgeois politics, but why not engage in a way that only strengthens us as communists, our positions, our ideology, and ultimately us as people, us as fellow citizens, right? If we're screeching from the streets, people aren't going to listen. But if we get up like that Norman Rockwell painting, or even the painting during the French Revolution, citoyens, right? Citizens, I'm here, we're here, right? And we give passionate speeches about the need for the control, the oversight, the welfare of the people. I mean, people love that. People absolutely flock to that. That's what they want to see. They want to be inspired. They want to have people who are actually struggling for them. And so I think that when you have an outsider come in and say, look, it's same old with this clique that's running law enforcement. Let's have somebody come from outside and try to, shake things up and clean house. People were really receptive to that. And I think that the votes only prove that. And of course, last night were the early results. But as you've seen, we're almost at 400 votes, 400 write-in votes. That means 400 people took the time to spell my name. Some of them spelled it wrong, but that's okay. But to put down each letter of my name as best as they could, that shows that they also put their trust in us, just as we put our trust in them, right? And that's the beauty of our system. That's the beauty of being a citizen. That's the beauty of being part of a mass movement. That's the beauty of being part of a community, right? So I think that that's really the victory. The victory belongs not to me, not to the party ultimately, but to the people who put their trust in new leadership and put their trust in a future that is one that only helps to enrich and strengthen their power ultimately.
I think this is a great comment from Doug. Americans are pragmatists. They are not overly ideological. They will say, if I'm a communist, well, who cares? I guess I'm a communist then. And that's so true. This is why, one of the central differences between our party and all the other ones that have called themselves Marxist Leninists is that they go on the basis of ideological purity. They care about the purest programs, the purest, theory coming out in the journal, and all that good stuff. And that's not to downgrade theory or programs or any of that, but our basis is results. If we're not bringing in, and putting the bread on the table, we're going to be out, right? It doesn't matter how many books we publish and all that good stuff. We have to bring the results first, and that's what the people care about. They care about facts, actions, and showing them in action what we're all about, showing them what communism is about, not through our words, but through our actions. And that's when they'll begin to have faith in us. But I have a question specific to Vermont besides your election. You mentioned yesterday on the infrared stream show towards the end that it was also the case that in the state of Vermont, where I think people recognize it as one of the more progressive, quote unquote, progressive states in the union, at least since the election of Bernie Sanders as an independent, quote unquote, socialist. But yesterday there was a few Republicans that unseated some so-called progressive Democrats. So two types of red waves just in Vermont itself that might highlight the sort of political restructuring of the country. But can you speak a little bit about that as well, and perhaps in conjunction with your election and what it means in terms of the politics of Vermont?
Sure, of course. And I explained this to my students today because, of course, I'm a teacher, social studies teacher. I teach U.S. history and American government to 9 to 12 graders, right? So teenagers who are from both Vermont and New Hampshire. It's an interstate school district. So a lot of them asked me these questions right today. So we went through, and I think that diagnosing what happened is critical to understand, number one, what mistakes were made. So I think that the Democratic Party needs to do a postmortem on themselves and their failures, which I hope they do, but knowing history, they won't do. And they have already started to blame Latinos and, young black men and Arabs and Muslims and Jill Stein again and the Russians for destroying the election. But ultimately, there's a few key things that at the local level that made this possible, and that these were the key things that happened yesterday. Lieutenant Governor David Zuckerman, a longtime associate of Bernie Sanders, worked on his campaign back in the day. He's a farmer. He's a wonderful man. I know him personally. He's a progressive. He was lieutenant governor. He was the incumbent. He was unseated by an outside Republican who came in, right? So the incumbent lieutenant governor was ousted. The longtime senator of Orange County, where I am, a Democrat, a Vietnam veteran, was unseated by an outside Republican. First time that they took this position. Our House of Reps, our General Assembly rep here in Orange 1, was unseated by a Republican. And what happened last night, as I mentioned to you yesterday, was that the Republicans for the first time broke the Democrat progressive supermajority in the General Assembly, right? So it's been basically, I think, around 2 decades of Democrat supermajority, and they broke it last night. So you got to ask yourself, okay, Vermont, progressive Vermont, Bernie Sanders Vermont. Vermont also has the most successful third party in the country. The Vermont Progressive Party is a major third party that had the lieutenant governorship. It had senators and representatives in our General Assembly. It had city councilors, mayors. It had justices of the peace, high bailiffs, whatever it might be, right? So you got to ask, why did this happen? I think there are multiple reasons why. Number one, after the pandemic, there's been a housing crisis in Vermont. A lot of people love Vermont for its beauty, and it is a beautiful place in the country, one of the most gorgeous areas. And of course, a lot of people bought second homes, creating a housing shortage and driving up the costs. Now, if you're an average Vermonter who's blue collar, you got a family farm, or you're working a service sector job, or even the few factory jobs that still exist around here, your property taxes have gone up quite a bit, as have living expenses in the state. So the state that you grew up in and the state that you love is being inundated with people from outside who aren't paying their fair share and then driving up costs. The costs of schools, of funding the schools have gone up. So overall, there's been a crisis economically speaking. There's a lot of reasons why we could take us, hours to get into it. But the basic thing is that people are fed up with what they've seen economically speaking. And they've seen the Democrats take these huge budgets, and in their opinion, they've been mismanaged. So they punished the Democrats last night. Number two, I think there's a big payback for the mandates, the masking, and things like that during COVID. I think that part of last night was also against what they saw as people's complicity during the pandemic. We haven't really had, this is 2024's election. 2022, we were still in the midst of it. So this is also the repercussions from that. I know a lot of people in town. There were a lot of fights in our county amongst, citizens and friends and neighbors and families about the pandemic. I think that came home to roost last night. I think schools, and I told my students, and some of them were really shocked and horrified, but it's just a fact. My school's in a blue bubble, but outside that bubble, people are really frustrated about what they see as the LGBTQ woke ideology. They're seeing it all over the schools. That's not to say that we are against LGBTQ people. We support them. We love them. Everybody is good. The thing is, they're not happy about what's going on in the schools. They're seeing inculcation. They're seeing different types of programming that they're not really happy with. And I think that it's important to listen to the grievances. They're like, why are we spending so much time on social emotional learning and well-being when education is the primary reason why you're at a school? I think that voters are punishing what they see as sort of a new educational system that they're not fully on board with, and they see it as counterproductive. I think that a lot of the national issues have come home to roost as well. I think people generally are upset with the state of the Democratic Party, what's going on. I also think that the local elections were emblematic in some ways of the international situation. I think Democrats were punished for what's happening in Gaza, the ongoing genocide against the Palestinian people, and for what's going on in Ukraine. And I think that some of these issues have been talked about all over. I was at an event just 2 weeks ago, and people were talking to me about Ukraine and Gaza in my tiny town. I had at somebody's birthday party, right? So just to let you know that these are real situations, and everybody's coming up and asking me questions. So I think that it's important to recognize that this was meant to be a check on the Democrats just having freewheeling power that they've had for such a long time, and basically say, come back to the table and let's talk in a way that we can understand each other and you can hear us out, because so many in Vermont have not been heard. And so they're like, okay, we're going to take it to the ballot box. And they did last night. And I think that it was a wake-up call. And I think that the nation had a wake-up call. If you look at the map from this election, not only in Vermont, but first of all, Vermont is complete red for the governor. Our governor is a Republican. The Vermont, every single town voted Republican for the governor, right? When it gets to lieutenant governor, it's a bit more mixed. And then overall, you just see a mix. Like Vermont, you might see it as blue on the MSNBC or CNN or New York Times map as a state. But you click on that state, and we got red in here, right? You click on any state, and it's mainly the urban areas that are the blue areas. Everywhere else is red. And you got to really, like, at some point, somebody has to be scientific. As we as Marxists, we're scientific, right? We're not utopian. I'd like to have the world that I desire and dream of like you all do, right? But we don't have it. So we got to be scientific. We got to analyze it. We got to say, how did this happen? Where are we at? How did this happen? And what are the remedies to keep pushing us forward on the path that we want to see? And so I think that that's what, I've been doing these days, and I've been talking with people about, especially today, what ended up happening. And I think that unless we do that in an honest and sober way, we're not going to have clear understanding of what ended up transpiring last night. And I think that a lot of people don't want to come to terms with the fact. I was watching even The View today just to see what they were saying. They don't want to come to terms with reality. I'm sorry, but you all messed up royally. I told my students, I said, this election was over when people were justly protesting the Democrats, and Kamala Harris said, I'm speaking. right? I'm speaking. All right, you want to smack your own base? They're going to smack you back. And they smacked back hard last night. If you look at the results from Dearborn, I mean, Biden won it by upwards of 80%. 36% voted for Kamala Harris last night. 36% from 80 to 36. Imagine that on a national level. That's the smackdown the Democrats got. And I think that that also reflected here in Vermont, where we've had a very prominent Palestine solidarity movement, Vermonters for Justice in Palestine. It's now become the Vermont Coalition for Palestinian Liberation. And of course, people have this on their mind, right? People sat it out. People didn't vote for Democratic candidates, or they wrote in candidates. You see a lot of write-in candidates. And ultimately, people were concerned about the state of the country, the state of their children's education, the state of the roads, the state of the overall, the police, the fire department, whatever it might be. And so they punished the Democrats that had the supermajority for so long, that haven't delivered fully on the promises that they said they would in Montpelier and elsewhere. And so that's really what we saw last night. I think that ultimately where it goes from here is up to the big parties to figure out how they're going to deliver on their promises. Sadly, I think that the Democrats are going to continue to fumble. They had a massive fumble last night. I told my students, I said, this was Super Bowl level fumble. You know, how you could fumble this, I don't know, but they did, because ultimately they're not concerned about the working class. They're concerned about their elite donors, right? And it's really a tale of two coasts, that really makes a Democratic Party. When you look at it, besides, okay, Chicago and a few states in the Midwest, and few
Chicago's a coastal colony they put there in the Midwest.
Exactly, you see. But really, the rest of the country. I mean, so when you really have to analyze that, you have to look at it, you have to come to terms with it. This country has spoken. I tell my students, Vox Populi, Vox Dei. And that's just it. I'm sorry. The masses have spoken. You got to listen. And we have to be like Chairman Mao. Theory and practice. It's nice to have the theories. You got to put it into practice. Then from the practice, you go back to the theory and you adjust the theory, you throw out the theory, and you develop a new synthesis that can help explain what the practice has given you in terms of evidence. Unless you're doing that, everybody's heads in the sky. You remember they used to talk about Socrates in the clouds, right? That's what we were like, sophistry now. I got the Democratic Party are like the contemporary sophists, right? They're just babbling away. No roots in the ground. We got to have roots on the ground. And that's the importance of ACP. That's what we're up to. And that's what we proved last night.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with your analysis of the election overall. I've been echoing a lot of those same points with my content and election analysis. And I even noticed this video of Hassan Piker just came out where he says, based on the election results, I feel like it's time for the ACP to rise up. And he's kind of kidding, but I think that's him realizing that people in this country are desperate for an anti-establishment, anything in politics, anything anti-establishment, but they view wokeism, and the so-called LGBTQ movement being enforced upon them from the top down by these think tanks and corporations and whatever else. They view that as part of the establishment. So for someone like Hassan Piker, this is why his views have been going down, because, he's left-wing economically, but he's pushing these liberal cultural views and this liberal wokeism that regular working class Americans see as part of the establishment. It's from the establishment, and they're correct in that. So the it's really fertile grounds, as Carlos would say, for a real anti-establishment party and real anti-establishment politicians who don't buy into the weaponization of identity politics and so-called wokeism of the Democrats and the liberal ruling class.
And you know what? This is something that Haz mentioned at the beginning of his stream yesterday. And I also think Jackson mentioned it in his show from today. By the way, for those that haven't watched Jackson's new show, it's incredible. He's got some of the best guests on, and even the programs he does alone are also amazing. But there's something very sweet about seeing the Democrats lose. These are the people that have been stopping us at airports the last 4 years, giving a thumbs up for what? For being peace-loving, patriotic Americans. These are the people that have censored us in a million different ways. These are the people that transferred control over the algorithms of various apps to entities that are designed to get us to accept their narrative, to reject the truth, and to censor the truth, to censor dissenting voices, and thereby take away our right to free speech. So these are the people that have made it already feel like we're living in some form of fascist capitalist governance. So it's pretty sweet to see them lose. That doesn't mean we're pro-Trump, but the reality is that at a very personal level, I'm kind of happy to see these liberals coping and seething. And I wanted to start off our discussion of the elections in general, the presidential elections, by showing you guys this video that I think you will enjoy. It's a compilation of liberals freaking out and crying about the election results. So we'll watch bits of it and then come back and analyze.
All right, guys, it's time to go to bed. None of us are stressed about the election, right? We all are gonna just go have the best night's sleep of our lives, aren't we?
When did it end? All the enjoyment. I'm sad. When did it end? All the
Do you realize how fucking weird you have to be to grab a phone and just start crying on camera?
enjoyment.
Social media brain rot.
I'm done. I'm done. I'm done. I'm done with you. I'm done with you and your mother and your sister. I'm just done with all of this.
It's not gonna happen. Go, Kamala. Guys, we literally.
Do you know what this actually reminds me
You
of,
don't know.
Carlos? And Chris, it reminds me of people who like put emotional attachment into NFL football, and it like makes or breaks their week depending on how their team does. They have no control over it. Nothing's gonna change either way. They're not even part of the team. The team doesn't even really care about them, but they put so much emotional attachment into watching this scoreboard. And I like sports, but it's just insane to me.
We'll show a little bit more and then we'll come back to the drawing board.
To freak out right now. We don't even have to fucking we don't have to freak out. We don't have to freak out because it's not even real. Because, bitch, recount the vote.
Guys, I just voted, and I chose family.
And this reign of terror now.
I chose family. I chose women. I chose America. I love you.
We're moving on. I'm moving on. We're moving on.
I love all of this. Let's do it. Let's do this.
Bro, and these are the people that sit there and talk about like the workers that voted for Trump being a part of a fucking cult, It's insane. These people have seen, as everyone in the fucking planet has seen over the last year plus, American bombs land on babies, kill, according to the Lancet report, around 200,000 Palestinians, innocent civilians, little kids all over our feeds, dismembered, not being able to see the age of 30. They've seen this for a year. They've seen what their tax dollars have gone to do, what has been supported by this genocidal fascistic administration, not just supported in the sense of giving funding and giving the weapons, but supporting it through and through in the international arena, providing cover for the Zionist entity. And then they want to vote for them because of what? A political football called abortion rights that they've had decades to codify and they never did? Because if they codify it, what the hell are they going to run on in 2028 or 2032? I mean, this is the essence of what Lenin talked about when he talked about social chauvinism. giving the big old thumbs up to imperialism and the plunder of foreign lands and the bomb dropping and the killing of millions and hundreds of thousands just because I can get a little bit more crumbs. It's ridiculous, and I'm glad we should be laughing in their face because of how fucking ridiculous and social chauvinist they are. Anyways, Chris, your analysis.
I would love you. Listen, I've seen a lot of those videos today. Number one, we are in a deeply sick society. We are. Let's be honest. Number one, you got to be really privileged to do that kind of stuff, to just kind of hang out and cry into a camera. Egotistical, narcissistic. That's what Eddie said it right. This is a social media brain rot that we have. We've created a society of petty narcissists that go around and only care about themselves, how they look, how they trend, and I think it's deeply disturbing. My mom used to say, if something happened to me and I would be angry, I would, she would say, "Suck it up, Buttercup. You got to pick yourself up. I'm sorry, you got to move on." And so today, this, everybody's, the kind of wailing and gnashing of teeth that almost feels biblical, that's happening today. For me, I enjoyed it because then I said, now you know how we feel when the U.S. installs dictators in our countries, huh? How does it feel? How does it feel to not have it go your way? Just to kind of, like for us, for my family that came from overseas, the U.S. installed dictators, monarchs, fascist regimes. Our families continued to fight. Nobody cried into a camera. People fought. People went to prison. People were executed. People were exiled. I don't want to hear it. You don't like it? Organize. I don't know what to tell you. What are you just gonna cry and lament for the next 4 years? It doesn't make sense. It's not serious politics. Ultimately, it's pure theater. It's performance, right? It's not even worthy of like a cheap off-street Broadway performance, right? If I want to see theater, I want to see fucking Shakespeare, or I want to see some socialist art, I don't want to see this kind. This is a cheap gimmicks and cheap tricks, right? That's why I don't buy it. I think it's very disingenuous. I think it ultimately shows the vapid shallowness of our politics in the United States. It shows the unseriousness. And ultimately, when I go to other countries, I say, my God, these civilizational states have real politics, right? Mm-hmm. Not this kind of politics, real politics, patriotism, family, the nation, we don't have anything like that now. It's all about me, the me generation, right? And at this late stage of capitalism, at this late stage of empire, we really have become, an empire of babies. I really believe that. And so when you look at that and you analyze, you say, how can these things happen? I think that the pushback last night was against this tendency. I think that a lot of people are just sick of it. They're sick of seeing it, and they wanted to hand the Democrats the big L. And I think they'll keep handing L's if situation doesn't change. This is an extension of the larger culture war issues, because ultimately it's a war over what does American culture and American civilization look like. Really, if you think of it that way, are we going to be a civilization? Are we going to be a nation of crybabies and people who are just self-absorbed all day, every day? Or are we going to be a country of communities that are resilient, that continue to fight for their well-being? And I don't know. I think it's still up in the air where we go. I know that ACP is committed to a vision that is of a nation that is unified, that is collectivized, that is one that fights for one another and for the downtrodden. We're not there yet. I mean, we're a nation still beholden to capital, to the ruling class, to the global elite, to those who continue to plunder the resources of this great land. But that's our struggle. We don't cry. There's no time to cry. There's no time to lament. Organize. Right? Was that all these people? We've had how many martyrs in this country? How many people have given their blood from Haymarket and before till today. How many people have spent time in prison? You think even Du Bois or MLK or Malcolm X felt bad for themselves? You think that they had the luxury to cry into a camera? No. Organize, organize, organize. The people died, pick up the rifle, keep fighting, right? I think that some parts of the right are still emblematic. They still believe this. This is still their ethos, right? I give credit where credit's due. I think a lot of them still have this, still aspire to this ideal, 1776 type patriotism, right? Pick up the musket and keep going, hold the line, I think that a lot of the left has forgotten this. You know why? Because in order to remember this, you have to struggle, and you have to know what struggle's like. Real struggle. Real struggle. My grandfather, who was a partisan in World War II, I've said this previously, he always said that the United States needs a war again, a war at home, to realize what real communists look like. That's when you rise to the occasion. That's when you separate the wheat from the chaff, right? That's when people will really say, follow me, right? The U.S. infantry has this slogan, right? Follow me. And you have the soldier, putting up the hand with the rifle in the other. Think about all of the partisan movements that built revolutions, right? Follow me. The comrade falls, pick up the rifle, keep going, comrades, right? In Stalingrad, wherever it is, fighting fascists, right? That's just how it is. You're going to you're going to sacrifice, and you might make the ultimate sacrifice. You keep fighting, right? You keep fighting. But, that I love that the People's Democracy Party of South Korea, right? The PDP of South Korea, right? Who uphold the DPRK's leadership. What did they put in their August issue of their basically their journal, their theoretical journal in South Korea? They put the picture of Trump with the fists up, yelling "fight, fight" after the assassination attempt. Why? Because even the Koreans saw in that tremendous power, right? Could have sat there wailing, oh, poor me. No, fight, fight, fight. Regardless whether it was staged or not, I'm not getting into the conspiracy theories. But just that image alone is extremely powerful.
Yeah.
It's powerful because that's the ethos that some of his movement embody. You think we've seen that on our side? Not in the US, not recently, but I've seen it in the past, and I've seen it in Gaza, and I see it in Lebanon, and I see it everywhere else around the world. I see it in the Sahel, I see it with police, I see it everywhere else, but I do not see it as much here. And that's an ethos that ACP is trying to recreate and form and forge amongst our members, right? And I hope that's what we can forge in the American working class, like they did of old, when workers picked up rifles and picked up pitchforks and picked up shovels and axes and hammers and went out there and said, you want to come fight? We're ready for a fight. We're ready for a fight. And they gave blood for those fights. And that's what built the labor movement. But now, of course, the labor movement is woke. But we don't need a woke labor movement. We need a militant labor movement. We need a labor movement that's out there in the streets ready to fight and ready to sacrifice. And we need a working class ready to do that. And for that to happen, it needs leadership. And right now, the ACP is the only party that can offer that kind of leadership.
I couldn't agree more about these liberals. I deal with them a lot on social media, and it really has rotted their brain in a lot of ways. And their politics comes down to, none of the things that you were talking about, none of these collective or material things. It all comes down to virtue signaling, oftentimes through the medium of social media. Virtue signaling and condescending towards other people, trying to be the most righteous in your positions always, and explain to other people why they're not so righteous. And they don't realize how sick, middle America and the American working class is of this shit. They're tired of the virtue signaling. They're tired of the condescension. They want a real politics. And the liberals don't realize this. There's no self-reflection. I saw somebody today saying that Jill Stein voters are parasocial, and arguing that they're antisocial or whatever. What do you call these videos of people crying into their cell phones? People who have no friends, so they have to grab their cell phone when they cry, and post it on the internet for everyone to see, so everyone can know how sad they were and how much they cared and how virtuous they are. People are tired of this, and you're seeing liberals get mocked today, when they're like, F every single one of you who voted third party. Like, people aren't taking that seriously anymore. They're saying, no, F you. You funded a genocide. You didn't give the working class anything. What did you expect to happen? You know, just because you act so virtuous and so much better than Trump doesn't mean that you actually are. And it's been years of this woke liberalism now, with Trump sort of providing a counterpole to that, although I would argue it's a fake counterpole and we are the real counterpole. But people are just absolutely fed up with it at this point, and I don't blame them at all.
Yeah, shout out to Edwin. Thank you so much, comrade. Congrats to Chris Helali for winning. The organizing effort by ACP was super impressive. Definitely positive movement forward. Thank you so much, comrade. By the way, for those watching, this is a people's funded, grassroots funded institute, so we are tremendously appreciative of these donations. Thank you to David, to this individual from Antarctica. Thank you so much. Thank you to Corvus. Shout out to Corvus. We'll ask this one shortly. And thank you to Cobb Fan for the 5. You know, Chris, you mentioned, you highlighted a quote that reminded me of something that Joe Hill says right after he's murdered, I believe, by the Utah police. One of the last words of right before he gets killed is, "Don't mourn, organize."
Yep.
That's the sort of spirit we need to have. That's the spirit of communists. And, you know, it's not without reason that when we look at some of the key terms in the Marxist-Leninist lexicon, vanguard, hegemony, all these terms, they come from military discourse, right? Because it's the communists that are the ones that, in the same way that the military functions for society as this core group of elite individuals in various areas who are highly disciplined, that's what a communist party should be. But instead of serving, you know, capitalist state in one instance, what it should serve is the actual people, the movement of history. They are the agents that allow history to move forward. But I wanted to ask you a question that's kind of connected to Corvus's here. We've seen a political realignment, both in general, right, and in Vermont, with this move towards the Republican. And as you, I, Eddie, and I'm sure most of the chat knows, I don't think the people are going to be satisfied with the Republicans either. The reasons that led them to leave the Democratic Party and to vote for the Republicans are not going to be fulfilled or satisfied with the Republican Party. So how do you see that moving forward, specifically a movement like MAGA, which is so grassroots and popular, rooted in either rural America or the urban parts of the country where industry has fled due to neoliberal policies and the natural tendency of capitalism. So how do you see the next few years when the slight bit of a promise of a different route that is presented to people by the fact that the Republicans are not the Democrats doesn't actually turn out to be any different?
I think this is something actually I addressed today with my colleagues as we were discussing, and they were trying to do a post-mortem themselves. And I simply said, look, what was needed all along since 2016, since even before 2016, I would argue since 2008, during the height of the financial crisis and then the collapse of, you remember, you know, Bear Stearns, Lehman Brothers, all this stuff that, you know, went down. What was needed most was an economic populism from the left.
Yep.
And what I'm talking about here, and we can go back to history, was sort of the farmer labor parties of the teens, the 20s, the 30s, the progressives that came up, the communists who organized, right? CPUSA. That's what we need. We need a type of economic populism from the left that will deliver, that will absolutely, you know, hang the millionaire and billionaire class out to dry. Now, of course, we know that the MAGA movement will not do that, right? At least the MAGA leadership. The MAGA movement desires that, I believe, because, you know, all of the people who voted for Bernie, a lot of them went to the Trump side. A lot of them went to the MAGA movement, right? That's just a reality that we have to contend with. And this is the similar thesis that's been laid forward in the famous book, What Happened to Kansas, right? How did Kansas go from one of the most progressive, revolutionary, radical states in the United States to a bastion of conservatism? And that's ultimately that ultimately can tell and sort of be the crystal ball, be the canary in the coal mine for the fortunes of the rise and fall of economic populism and its deliverance on what it can provide for the masses, right? And so when we look at this, ultimately, only an economic populism that can deliver for the working class is able to not only maintain power, but increase power and deliver the goods long term, right? And so the fact that the MAGA leadership will not be able to deliver that, and we know the tax breaks coming down the line and the increasing wealth inequality. I mean, we are, like I said, we're scientific. We just look at the data, right? The data points continue to show an increasing economic inequality. I mean, at the end of the day, history, as a historian, history proves the guillotines come one way or another. I'm sorry, there's no way to prevent it. Whether we do it or others do it, I can't tell you. I don't have a crystal ball, but it's going to happen. It's going to happen because income inequality to such an extent only leads to violence, because that's the only way to solve the political contradictions that exist when people feel not only alienated, but outside of the political structures overall. So what my argument was today to my colleagues was, in order to fix the ongoing terminal crisis, you need an economic policy, an economic populism that can transform the entire system, that can remake the entire system, that can destroy the empire. Unless you do that, we're only going to heighten and sharpen the contradictions, because we know that the Trump side will not deliver on what is needed most. An isolationism that still has this ruthless capitalism will only cannibalize the United States from within, right? So everybody comes home, but you start increasing this inequality even more so. I mean, it's not sustainable overall. Plus, I don't even think that isolationism is sustainable, because the American economy is driven by empire right now. So, okay, you have an isolationist position, nice in theory. Where the factory is going to be? I asked my students today, I said, are you guys going to go out there and make Hasbro toys? Am I going to see you on the factory line making, plastic toys for the playground? I don't think so. I don't think they're coming back, right? At least not in the current system, right? It can't. So ultimately, unless you come to terms with this issue, unless you really come to terms with the structural issues, the institutional issues, and the crisis of political leadership in this country, nothing's going to change in the near term. And in the long term, we're only going to enter a period of more instability and crisis coming up, which will have a tendency towards violence. That's just the reality.
Corvus asked if you think something like a Democratic J6 is likely to happen. I personally, and I mean this in the nicest way possible. How do I put this in a way that's not vulgar? I don't think they have the balls. Make of that what you will. I don't think, and when they've done things like that, it's usually been as individuals. They're very narcissistic, even if it's in a corrupted form. I think conservative working class communities that make up the MAGA base are much more collectivist in thinking and capable of something substantial like that. And like Chris said, they're much more driven by that old spirit of heroism and picking up the musket and doing what you have to do for your country. I don't think the liberals will do much more than what we saw there in that video, just cry and seethe about it. But maybe I'm wrong. What are your thoughts?
I don't see anything like that happening, to be honest. I don't think that there'll be a Democrat January 6th. Number one, the Democratic base is just cursory look. He's not as militant. He's not as organized. He's not as disciplined as some sections of the Trump base. Let's just be honest. When you look at militia movements, they are overwhelmingly, if not almost all, from that side of the equation. Mm-hmm. I don't know of any Democrat militia movements. And I do know about the, socialist gun clubs that came up. SRA, cannibalized itself. John Brown gun clubs cannibalized themselves. All these groups because purity fetish. You're not as pure. We went from MLs and sort of like more Big Tent to like only anarchists and, kick out the tankies and you're all horrible. And you don't see that as much in the other circles. So yeah, I don't see it. I don't see it at all happening. I think that they're maybe January 6th, they're going to be a lot of crying and hugging sessions and, sort of circles and
Safe spaces.
talking about our feelings. Instead of safe spaces, they need a couple brave spaces to do a Democrat January 6th, but I don't see that happening anytime soon.
Yeah, I don't
Okay.
either. I was gonna say exactly what Carlos said. They don't have the balls, and it's a good point too that they're too individualistic to do something like that. Sacrifice themselves for what they see as being, the good of the country, whether it would be or not. So, yeah, I don't have much to add.
The other thing that I think it's important to bring up, and we wanted to do this with you on, was the BRICS summit. I don't know about you, but I see multipolarity as a revolution in the logic that animates geopolitical relations. It's not necessarily socialism, but it's definitely bringing about a new world. And when you go from a world where the US can just, as imperial hegemon, impose its will on other countries to a world that's based on, as the Chinese say, win-win relations, on mutually beneficial relations, that is a radical qualitative shift in world history. And BRICS is the skeleton that is forming this new world and the institutions attached with BRICS, such as the New Development Bank and others. So paying attention to the BRICS summit is as important a thing you could do to see the trajectory and embryonic development of this new world that's, right in front of our faces, that no one can deny is being born. So as someone whose area of specialty is international relations, and who has worked as an international secretary in the context of a communist party for many, many years, how do you understand both this development of multipolarity and the BRICS? And what are your thoughts on the recent BRICS summit?
Well, this connects actually the previous topic to our current topic. When I spoke with my students today, I asked them, what were the main issues that led to the Trump victory? And one of them I said was the economy, but the economy in an international dimension too. Trump just a few weeks ago has started to speak about de-dollarization, sanctions. He started to address what everybody sees as the writing on the wall, which is that the global system is changing. We are moving from a Bretton Woods system to a post-Bretton Woods system. And ultimately, what does that mean? It means de-dollarization. It means the idea that the United States' economic coercive policies and mechanisms, the United States' financial institutions, will no longer have the same power and reach as they have in the past. And ultimately, what does that do? It further isolates the United States. It helps to decrease the value of the dollar, and that will only lead to further economic instability and the possibility of inflationary periods or recession within the United States. And so when I addressed this, students were quite surprised. And so I put a picture of the BRICS conference that just happened, the BRICS summit in Kazan. And I went through, and the students could identify maybe 2 or 3 leaders, but we went through, right? You had Putin, you had South Africa's president, you had Xi Jinping, you had Iran's president, you had the leader of the Republic of Congo, Turkey, Armenia, and Azerbaijan, 2 enemies that were there together, staying next to each other, Belarus, Lukashenko, Maduro. You had the whole crew there. You had even Mahmoud Abbas of the Palestinian Authority, right? Coming from Ramallah. And what does this mean? It means ultimately that Putin is not isolated. I said number one. Number two, the United States, through decades of economic coercive measures and maximalist sanctions, has pushed 40 plus countries together that are not necessarily ideologically the same, but that now see their fate intertwined in order to combat a unipolar world and the US hegemony or Western hegemony overall, right? So when I mean that, I say the United States, Canada, Western Europe, Australia, New Zealand, right? That's really, and then they have regional partners, and they have colonies, and they have their outposts like Israel, South Korea, Japan, right? And even before Colombia, but now not as much, given that Colombia is left wing now. So when you look at this, overall, when you understand the architecture that exists at this point, you can understand that the United States is entering a period not only of terminal decline, we like to use this kind of phraseology, but really a period of instability in terms of global leadership that it itself controlled the helm of since 1991, right? And so what does that mean? It means ultimately a Trump presidency in the next 4 years has to come to terms with this. And what I think is going to happen, if you want my prognosis, the United States will try to divide Russia and China, will try to move India closer to its orbit because they're going to try to use Modi and Hindutva ideology to bring it outside of the sphere of the BRICS. They'll try to see if they can finagle a way to solve the situation in Ukraine and the war, give Russia probably 25% of Ukraine, and then say, all right, now let's pivot towards China and hammer them, right? Because they know that without China, Russia is in a very weak position, comparatively speaking, not militarily, economically. And they're going to try to, emphasize, even though Russia is the richest in terms of resources, the question ultimately is of its isolation, right? Now that Russia has emerged as sort of this leader, and really, Moscow is the center of the world again in terms of the international community. Forget about Washington. Everybody's in Moscow. When you look at that, you have to recognize that the United States is deeply fearful of a world where it loses that number one spot. Even if that number one spot becomes a coalition of countries, right? A union of countries, that's its biggest fear. So Trump was the only one speaking about this. I didn't hear anything from Kamala Harris. I heard about the classic line, okay, Putin's a dictator and authoritarian, and this one and this authoritarian, that one's authoritarian, totalitarian, whatever the hell they want to use. But the real meat and potatoes Trump mentioned at some of the economic talks and club talks that he gave, and that was that the movement and the strengthening of BRICS and the development of the multipolar world is directly a challenge to U.S. Global hegemony and to the U.S. position. And of course, you have to wonder, if Trump is America first, why would they necessarily care about U.S. hegemony? But this is an interesting, I think, doublethink or schizophrenia that exists within the MAGA camp. At one side, we are isolationist. At the other side, the only way America can remain the dominant power in the world is to not be isolationist. So we're isolationist in some ways, and then we're the most imperial in others, right? And so this level of real schizophrenia, I think, is at the real core of the inability of the Trump campaign and now the Trump presidency soon to be to deliver on its promises. It cannot, because within its own ideological structure, whatever that ideological structure might be, and we can say if it's weaker or stronger, it's totally contradictory, right? Its contradictions are so rife that it actually tears its entire ideology apart from within, right? It's like the alien jumping out of the chest, right? It's the chest burster, right? The chest is America first, but the alien is imperialism. And ultimately, that imperialism needs to get out, because America first and an isolationist America is a weak economic America. And if you want to have the dominant economic America, in terms of economy and in projection of economic power, then that alien has to pop out of the chest and, devour everybody and everything in its path, right? And so when you finally recognize that, you understand not only, number one, our position being the correct one, but number two, the fact that the economic populism from the right cannot deliver. And so how can communists see multipolarity and see BRICS? ACP sees multipolarity not as an end in itself, but as a progressive strategic step in the right direction. Why, you might say? People accuse us of all sorts of things. You are Duginist, you are third positionist. I've seen some of the comments, joking, that we are, of that mindset. We're not. What we are saying is that multipolarity allows the space and the breathing room for countries to develop their own modes of production, their own ability and relations with other countries for win-win cooperation, whether that's on the economic or diplomatic realm. And on top of that, it gives breathing room for revolutionary movements in countries that are proxies or lackeys of the United States to finally overthrow the shackles, whether it's of monarchical rule, whether it's of a bourgeois, right-wing rule, or even in some cases liberal rule, and to finally eke out the victories that they need for national self-development. So that's the way to frame it. And so I think that this election has as its specter the multipolar world. And let's be honest, the multipolar world, de-dollarization are at the forefront of the thought now in the think tank establishment, and it's slowly entering the lexicon of the political establishment. And ultimately, they have to come to terms with the fact that, I'm sorry, the world is changing. The United States is no longer top dog. And unless the United States is willing to go to war and spend not billions, trillions of dollars, plus hundreds of thousands, if not millions of lives, if it doesn't end up in a thermonuclear war, I don't think there's any way to stop what's already been initiated and what's already developing. It's just a historical fact now. It's structural, it's mathematical. The change is here. The United States has to come to terms with it and has to learn how to deal with a new world order where it's not number one, but it's a great power amongst many great powers.
And this is, I think, part of the importance, I think, in conjunction with this transition to multipolarity, and I couldn't agree more that it's a progressive step. It's not the end goal. It's far from it, right? I've even tended to think, there's this old Leninist position that you engage in the democratic struggle within bourgeois context precisely because it makes the class struggle more acute, right? It makes it clear the real substantial divide in society. I think that's what multipolarity is going to do for a whole lot of these countries. You get U.S. imperialism the fuck out of there, and it makes it clear, what the new social divide is and what the new principal contradiction is, and obviously then creates fertile conditions for the struggle for socialism and the working class, their conquest of political power in these respective countries. But I think something that is also marking this transition to multipolarity is a recognition made explicit in the work of people like Zhang Weiwei and others that, perhaps some might have problems with. Definitely not a thinker who I fully agree with, but has some interesting ideas. People like Alexander Dugin. A transition from the bourgeois nation state to civilizational states. I think that's something that more and more is becoming almost like an evident component of this development of multipolarity. It's the poles are civilizational in character. How do you think about this context that we're in, where there's a deep crisis of legitimacy in all of the institutions of the United States, and at the same time we're in this sort of interregnum where a new world is on the horizon? The states and entities that engage with each other in the international arena are mostly beginning to think of themselves as civilizational in character, or moving towards it, or asking themselves those questions. How do you think we should be asking ourselves those questions? Because, one of the more heterodox components of the ACP's position, specifically from the standpoint of recent communist history in the US, is considering Canada a part of the United States of America, a part of America. So how are you thinking about this civilizational question in the context of this transition to multipolarity?
I'm thinking about it nonstop, and I'm thinking about it. Number one, we got to push back against number one what you have spoken about, the purity fetish. So Marxism, Leninism in the United States is historically always fracturing and fracturing and fracturing depending on the purity of the ideology. So you can create 100 or 200 page program that's absolutely amazing, the most fire ideology you can imagine. It's just pure gold. but that's meaningless if you have nothing in reality. I mean, I could, create the nicest formulas, but if the formulas don't produce anything in the real world, don't have any material consequences, they're useless. They're just art. That book, that huge tome of theory, is just nice literature at that point. It's nice art. We could hang it up, you could plaster it around, right? So that's at the first level. You have to understand that the crisis that the left is facing in the United States is, number one, the crisis of ideological legitimacy. Number one. Number two, the inability to be pragmatic and dynamic, right? ACP really emphasizes a pragmatism and dynamism that allows Marxism to be alive, to be a living science, a living mode of analysis. If you take the position that I think is dominant on the left, which is that Marxism is a closed book overall, and it is what it is, and you're just trying to reproduce what happened in the past with maybe a little bit of sugarcoating, you're not going to get anywhere because the world changes every day. And as the world changes, Marxist analysis changes. And that's one thing I learned as a Marxist philosophy student in China from 2013 to 2015, was that the Chinese were being very creative in their understanding and application of Marxism to the Chinese context, but overall to the global context. And I had the great privilege and honor of reading world systems theory and different texts like that from university onwards. I got to meet Emmanuel Wallerstein before he passed, and these were just such huge figures in neo-Marxist thinking, and they had been cast aside by many orthodox thinkers because they weren't pure enough. But ultimately, when I look at their analysis, it's absolutely spot on. They did the math, they did the data, they gathered, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of footnotes of the best sources that could come, whether it's economic data, theoretical data, archival data about, production of, I don't know, certain industrial goods or, harvests of potatoes or whatever, to give broad understandings of agriculture and industry on a world level, right? I think that we as the American Communist Party need to be creative about our application of Marxism. I'm not interested in being in a religion. If I wanted a religion, I have a religion, right? What I'm interested in is a party that is dedicated, and a party that's dedicated towards really engaging and understanding the world around them and being able to provide not only a understanding of that world at that time, but a program to transform that world. And both of these things are always changing and adapting. And that's the dynamism that is at the heart of the ACP. And so I think that we are very unique. Let's be honest. We are unique. We are the only communist party at this point, and we're the only party that can provide this for the American people. This is the American Marxism you speak about in your book, which I read and I reviewed, and I thought it was absolutely necessary. It's absolutely necessary because a lot of people are not doing this. And no matter how many social issues you are working on, no matter how many tailist sort of tendencies you have, you will never win on that alone. You can't. The ruling class will never allow it, right? There's limitations and barriers to that. So when you are looking at, what we were just talking about, and you're analyzing it and you're saying, okay, so we have this multipolar world in development. It's emerging, right? But it's not emerging out of nowhere. It's not like some parthenogenesis. It comes out, or like some Platonic idea that falls from the sky. It emerges within a specific context at a specific time with specific formulas to understand its development. Only through applying Marxism creatively, dynamically, scientifically can you understand that. And then you can extrapolate from that what led to that and where that could possibly go. And you can begin the possible worlds, scenarios that could emerge. And I think that that's where thinkers like Dugin and others have provided some insight as to where this could go, right? It could go towards sort of state projects of socialism again, right, on a national level. It could go towards civilizational states, right? And this is the eternal conflict between sort of the Samuel Huntington school of thought around, clash of civilizations versus, other schools, right? There's a famous book about Fear of the Barbarian, which was a counter to Huntington's thesis about, civilizations overall and what we were looking. We had the president of Iran, right? Former president of Iran, Khatami, who said, we don't want a clash of civilization, we want a dialogue of civilizations, right? So what does this mean ultimately? We have to come to terms with this. We have to speak about where countries are at, where nation states are at, what are the current national liberation struggles going on, and ultimately, what are the units of power that are going to emerge long term? You brought up Canada. If you look and study American history, the War of 1812 and what preceded it, that was also a war to extend the very profound and progressive war that liberated the colonies from a British monarchical rule, and that birthed the first and longest lasting constitution in the world. The American Constitution is a dynamic constitution. I mean, right here, right here, very small, but the longest lasting constitution in the world with the most tremendous effect. That's not to say that the Constitution is perfect. And I know that people have been criticizing us for having an affection to the Constitution. No, but as a law student, there is no doubt that the Constitution has some very beautiful concepts, ideas, and structures ingrained with it. If it didn't, it wouldn't have lasted this long. The United States has not always been an empire. I mean, I think that that's a pushback against some contemporary theses that somehow tried to think that the United States was always an empire. It wasn't, right? It was an empire of liberty, if you want to frame it that way. And in that way, it inspired the Haitian Revolution, inspired the French Revolution, the Greeks, the Serbs, the Simon Bolivar in Latin America. I mean, it inspired the world over. Ho Chi Minh, how many people look to the United States Declaration of Independence and the Constitution as a framework, right? Mao thought George Washington was a tremendous hero, right? Chairman Mao looked to George Washington, as a progressive hero for the time period, right? We know the writings
Even
of Lenin.
the 36 Constitution in the Soviet Union.
Exactly.
The American.
Exactly. So without understanding that, you can have a proper understanding of the U.S. history as a whole. And I think that this is the current conflict between Aptheker and CPUSA's vision from before and Gerald Horne's vision. That's not to say that slavery wasn't a major component of U.S. history. It's simply to say that it doesn't rise to the same level because slavery itself was not monolithic and static. It was dynamically created and expanded and ingrained into law over time. It didn't all happen at once. It wasn't like it just popped up and this was this empire of slavery. No, it took time. And there were debates and there was tremendous struggles over it. So back to Canada. Canada is an unfinished revolution, right? It's an unfinished revolution. I think that, most of Canada's population lives between 50 or 100 miles of the border with the United States. That's just a reality, right? I do think that that Canada has an integral part with the United States. That's not to say, for example, that Quebec has an integral part. And I think that it's very important for us in ACP to understand that, I live, Vermont borders Quebec. Quebec is a French-speaking province that you feel like you're in Europe. You feel like you're in France. And so it has its own character, it has its own language, it has its own culture, and therefore it would meet the requirements laid out by Stalin for its own national liberation. It constitutes a nation. And I think that that's something that ACP has taken into consideration and understands in its program, that if a nation like that exists within the American continent, that they will be granted their self-determination. That includes indigenous nations, especially in Canada's north and within the United States, whose treaty rights have been violated. The CPUSA wrote a beautiful pamphlet that I reposted on Twitter some years ago that went viral, just because the communists in the Americas have already spoken about these issues, and we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We, of course, affirm the rights of indigenous peoples, but within the treaty obligations that have been laid out. And we, of course, want the expansion of those treaty rights and the full support for upholding those treaty rights, right? They are sovereign states, right, within the United States. So I think that all of these things, when you look at these, you analyze them, you bring them in, that helps to provide the path forward. That helps to give us clarity as to where we're going. But I do think that this idea that somehow every settler is going back to where they came from, or that somehow the United States is going to crash and burn on its own, it's just not going to happen. It's a fantasy. It's a fantasy in its own right. We have to transform it. And only through our leadership can we transform it, and can the American people put their trust in us.
That's so beautifully said. And one of the things I always bring up when this woke ultra leftist thesis about settlers comes up is that, I mean, technically, according to their logic, I'm a settler. And what other political faction would tell me, get out of the country? You're not actually from here. You don't belong here. It'd be the racist, the people we traditionally see as right wing. And this is the real horseshoe theory, I think. But I'll pass it over, Eddie, because I feel like I've been talking too much.
No, you're good. I agree. That was a good analysis. And I've talked about the settler issue millions of times for whatever reason. Maybe I got to deal with it more because I'm one of those white settlers. But yeah, I agree with what Chris says. We got some super chats here. Thank you, everyone. Just some guy with the $5 super chat. Do you think Russia will militarily support Iran if Iran and Israel go to full-scale war? Probably. I don't see why not. They're already strategic allies. We also got, this is a possibility, or thank you, Stalin's mustache, for the $5. It's also a possibility Trump passes in office. He's 78, and then we're at the whims of Vance and Thiel, who are much worse. Yeah, that would not be ideal. I think Trump's got less of a chance of keeling over than Biden did, though, to be honest. What do you? Thank you, videos, for the $20 super chat. What do you see happening in the EU? Rapidly rising. There's some weird. In BSW is rapidly rising in South Korea. We can't, if you used emojis, we can't see them.
Is that Wagenach's party? Is that the initial sport?
Yes, that's Wagenacht. Yep.
Okay. And that's South Korea. There's FICO and the Workers' Party of Britain in the UK, and in Valencia, Communist Vanguardias is helping where the government isn't with flood. That's awesome. It's Santiago Armacia's party, my buddy. The collapse lead to the rupture with NATO and EU. Very likely. I hope it does, but maybe I shouldn't say very likely. Seems like the European countries are really tied to the EU and NATO. It'd have to be like mass movement in the countries to bring it about, but hopefully. I don't know. What do you guys think?
What do you think, Carlos?
I don't know, man. I feel like there's a saying that it's bad to be an enemy of the U.S., but it's perhaps even worse to be a friend. And if I was a European, I'd be fucking pissed at how much of a cuck our leaders are, where they just, follow the U.S. and whatever the U.S. asks it to do and lead the country, whatever country it is, down the drain. I mean, someone like Olaf Scholz, the fact that he's not tried for high treason shows how anti-democratic these countries are, because he literally just sold his country for the U.S. That's it. Like the U.S. blows up their source of energy, what allowed Germany to be the only really industrial powerhouse in the EU. The productive base backing the European. Jesus, I'm forgetting the Europe, not dollar, the
euro.
The euro. There we go. How do I remember Europe but not euro? and it's all coming down. It's in a spiral of de-dollarization after the largest economic terrorist attack, the biggest pollutant in history done by the U.S. And Olaf Scholz is just there, not saying anything. And the German people are struggling. All over Europe, people are struggling, and they're finding the spontaneous ways that they have to get up and do something. The communists in Europe are frankly little different than what the sort of so-called communists we had to deal with here before the founding of the ACP were. Both are infected with Euro-communism, which stretched to this side of the Atlantic after it was initially developed by Carrillo and the other gang of reformists. So I think you rightly point at new forces that could potentially capture the discontent in a sort of left-wing, traditional socialist form. And at the end of the day, communism is the real movement of history, as Marx and Engels outlined in the German ideology. It's not these pure ideas, it's that movement. And if there's a thing that calls itself the Communist Party but wants to tie its lot to a decaying, falling European establishment, and there's these other entities that might not be working under the name of Marxism, Leninism, and communist parties, but want to actually move society forward, they're the ones that are the real communists, not the ones that call themselves that. We look at the world not on the basis of how things classify themselves. That's pure liberalism. That's how we understand things in the sort of bourgeois American ideology. If you classify yourself as a water bottle, you're a water bottle. That's it. Done deal. No, we look at the world as materialist. What are things in reality? What are they like in the processes in which they exist? And what are the contradictions that are embedded in these processes? How are they interconnected to their surrounding? And then let's pass judgment on that after we have a comprehensive, concrete study of the matter. But what a thing classifies itself is it's such a secondary ordeal. So I think that a lot of these forces that was brought up by the comrade that sent the super chat, they're going to play potentially the role of what a communist party ideally would play, what our party will play here in the U.S. But what are your thoughts, Chris?
I agree with what you're saying, and ultimately, I think that when you're analyzing what's going on in Europe, and you're looking at, especially like Wagner, you're looking at what's going on in Slovakia, you're looking at Workers' Party, what's happening in Spain, especially after the flooding. Condolences to all the lives, that have been impacted, in the lives lost during that catastrophic flooding. And rightly so, the people were furious at the king and the queen when they came, right? And they let them have it, right? What you're seeing in Europe is you're seeing people are fed up with the high energy costs, the high costs of living, all as a result of what they see as following in lockstep with the United States' war against the Russian Federation, right? They had cheap fuel coming in. Everything was much better before, the sanctions took place. And so people are frustrated. People are saying, just like we're saying in the U.S., how did, over $100 billion get spent in Ukraine when they're actually losing so bad on the battlefield right now? Europeans are saying, how did we lose, tens of billions of dollars and all this military equipment and now we're suffering economically as a result of the U.S.'s aggression against the Russian Federations. And so in that understanding, people are upset. People are furious. People are wondering what's going on. People are upset with U.S. base expansion in Europe, right? Even in my, home country of Greece, United States has expanded its naval presence and military presence and air capacity in Greece. It's a tremendous instance of a country basically going against its own population, which still remains more deeply anti-American as a result, especially of the illegal bombing of Serbia, right, in the late 90s, right? Huge thing that still affects the psyche of the Greeks who stood with their Serbian, with our Serbian, sisters and brothers. When you look at that, you can understand that people have a just rage and a just cause and have legitimate concerns and legitimate grievances over the European Union's policy. And ultimately, many of them are against NATO now. They want to see NATO disbanded. Of course, the propaganda machines have been very strong in places like Sweden and Finland to convince populations that normally were not in favor of NATO to all of a sudden come into NATO because of an existential threat of a Russian invasion. Russia's not interested in Finland and Sweden. They're just not. It's not what they're into. They're into protecting their border, and specifically, they're into Ukraine being accessible and not being a part of NATO, or they would have allowed even they say the European Union, but definitely not part of NATO or any other military alliance or bloc that would threaten the Russian Federation. Let's be firmly clear: the Russian Federation was invaded during the Polish and Lithuanian times, right, with the Commonwealths, that the crusading armies that fought the Kievan Rus and later the Muscovite, the Golden Horde, Napoleon, Hitler. How many times is Russia going to be invaded before they finally say no, not one more inch, right? Don't even think about it. And Ukraine is the soft underbelly of the Russian Federation. So of course they're not going to allow it. Just like they won't allow Georgia to join, because Georgia is the linchpin of the Caucasus region. If war breaks out there and they're able to sever parts of the Caucasus, I mean, that'll be catastrophic. And we know that the historic city of Stalingrad is just to the north of the Caucasus region, right? In a very strategic area. That's why Hitler wanted to take it, right? The gateway to the east and the gateway to the oil-rich area of the Caspian Sea, right? So when you understand these things, you can understand that people's legitimate grievances are against a system that continues to perpetuate war and thereby impoverishes the local populations. And they don't want it anymore. They're not going to tolerate it anymore. They want peace with Russia. They want peace with China. They just want, good jobs. They want to have their kids go and study at good universities and do well and do better than they did. And that can only happen if the war machine is stopped. And ultimately, if policies change, and I hope that NATO is disbanded, because NATO serves no purpose except to send young boys into harm's way to carry out the wills of Washington and Brussels. And it's high time that NATO disappears at this point.
I couldn't agree more. I think a whole lot of Americans agree. And we have this conception that Americans only care about themselves and don't give a shit about what's going on in the international arena. But I think one of the biggest issues that decide this election was the international arena. And it's not necessarily because they're, extreme empaths that care about what's going on around the world, but it's because they spontaneously realize that it's not disconnected. The misery that we experience here, the fact that we are living paycheck to paycheck and drowning in debt and desperate. You can't disconnect that from the 900 military bases around the world, from the proxy war we're waging against Russia, from the genocide we're funding of the Palestinians, and the proxy war that's we're approximating against China and Taiwan. So it's a good time, I think, to be a communist, especially in the U.S. The monster we have ahead of us is as big as you can possibly get. But Chris, is there anything you would like to plug before we head out here? We've been talking for almost 2 hours.
Oh, it's been fantastic. For those who aren't an ACP, check us out. I think that we are the party. I definitely think that, I'm sorry to say, but, we've taken the helm. We've taken the helm. Nobody else did it. We took the initiative. We're the vanguard, and we're out there. We're out there. And I'll tell you one thing. I have never felt closer to comrades like I do in the ACP. It's a great feeling. I have never had this level of comradeship and genuine friendship, genuine comradely, feelings of brotherhood and sisterhood in this organization, where you feel like I got your back, and you can talk real with people without everybody getting all sensitive and things, and you can lay it out, right? Like I always think about this exchange between Peng Dehuai and Mao in the 50s, and Peng just kind of busts open the door and hey, we gotta talk, and you're like, whoa, you're talking to Chairman Mao like that? But that's how they were, because they were back in the day. They were battle buds, they fought, they did long marches together. That was it. When you struggle with somebody like that, I don't care if they're chairman or who the hell they are. You're going to say, hey, get over here. We got to talk. And that's how I feel like the leadership treats one another with respect, but with a level of upholding, the requirements, the ethics, the values that we demand of each other, and holding our principles up high and holding each other accountable for our actions. And I think that the party overall is growing, it's dynamic, and I just couldn't be prouder. And so I'm going to plug the ACP, because ACP all the way. And ultimately, just continue to get out there, to do the work in your communities, continue to struggle. We have a world to win.
Couldn't agree more. That was great to hear. And I echo everything Chris said about the ACP. I'll say I had a really close bond like that with my college wrestling teammates. You hear about people who fight in war together, and they say, it's a bonding experience like you can't imagine. It's like that on a much lower level with wrestling. Like Chris said, you struggle together. You basically are fighting each other every day, but you build camaraderie through that. And the walking on eggshells and the cancel culture stuff is absolutely toxic to that. But a lot of my wrestling teammates, they struggled when they left college because they lost that community and they lost that sense of purpose. And for me, I haven't, because I feel like I have that same purpose through communism and that same community through the ACP. It really does feel like a high functioning sports team in a lot of ways. And I said for years that the left did not seem like that. The left was like a dysfunctional team where everybody was, hating on each other and canceling each other. You had to walk on eggshells all the time. But the ACP is truly I've been on good teams and I've been on bad teams, and the ACP's team culture is a winning culture. It absolutely is. I truly believe that. So acp.us if you want to get involved.
I couldn't agree more. I do have a couple things to plug as Secretary of Education. I don't think we've been able to talk about this on stream yet, but the official party theoretical journal is now out. It's got a beautiful name, Red America, because that's how America will be. Not the sort of red it will be in January when Trump is in office. A different type of red, a deeper red, a more American red. But you can sign up for the journal now. I think it's $15 ebook a month, or 25 paperback. So again, party prices. Any academic journal will cost you a whole lot more. And here we have cutting edge Marxist theory from thinkers from the U.S. and thinkers from around the world. We got Comrade Cockshot across the Atlantic, and a few comrades from the CPC, actually, comrade professors. So we're gonna have amazing articles here. So don't miss them. The only way you could read them is by subscribing to the journal. So subscribe as early as you can. And the other thing that I wanted to share is that today, up until tomorrow, I start my seminar on Marxism-Leninism. If you've ever had trouble reading the classics of Marxism-Leninism, Lenin, Stalin, Mao, etc., this class is just for you. It's institute level prices. We're not gonna rip you off as the academy does. We're going to provide for you the level of rigorous education that you might get in some of the best parts of the academy for a very, very small fraction of that price. You can now sign up for the first part of the 16-week course, which is basically just straight myself. And it runs mostly on Thursdays, with the exception of a week that I'll be in Venezuela and Thanksgiving, of course. I think Eddie's going to be there for a couple classes on imperialism. So
You bet. I'll do a guest lesson there, a feature verse.
Hell yeah, we're looking forward to that. No one has read Lenin's Imperialism closer than Eddie. He's done reading groups on it himself, a whole reading guide for YouTube. So I know he's going to do an amazing job. And tomorrow's at 7 p.m. is the last day. So tonight's technically the last day. You can sign up for that now. I'm putting the link in the chat. And for the journal, you can sign up at redamerica.acp.us. So thank you so much, Comrade Chris, for being here. It's been a real pleasure to have you on. We got to bring you back on more often. For those that don't know, and I hate to do this to you, Chris, because I myself hate flattery whenever it's done. But Chris is literally one of the most impressive individuals I've ever met in my life. He's got like half a dozen master's degrees. Like 2 of them are from fucking Ivy Leagues. The man's been at war fighting terrorists. He's traveled to every country on the planet, basically. He's a polymath, just a brilliant individual, someone who is not just theoretically brilliant, but also a man of practice, as is shown by his victory as High Bailiff there in Orange County, Vermont. So someone who I'm very proud to call a comrade and a very good friend. So thank you so much for being here with us. Hopefully the first, or I think second of many more times we'll have you on. And, thank you to all of those who were here, who were able to donate and support us. And the algorithms are not going to push this content out, folks. So it's up to you to share it with your neighbors, with your community, with your coworkers, so that they can hear this message, which is a message of truth and revolutionary optimism. So without further ado, we'll close out, as we always do, with the beautiful Americanized rendition of the great International. See you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Stand up, all victims of oppression, for the tyrants fear your might. Don't cling so hard to your possessions, for you have nothing if you have no right. Let racist ignorance be ended, for respect makes the empires fall. Freedom is merely privilege extended, unless enjoyed by one and all. So come, brothers and sisters, for the struggle carries on. The International unites the world in the song. So comrades, come rally, for this is the time and place. The international ideal unites the human race. Let no one build walls to divide us, walls of hatred nor walls of stone. Come greet the dawn and stand beside us. We'll live together or we'll die alone. In a world poisoned by exploitation, those who have taken, now they must give. And end the vanity of nations. We've but one earth on which to live. So come, brothers and sisters, for the struggle carries on. The International unites the world in the song. So comrades, come rally, for this is the time and place. The international ideal unites the human race. And so begins the final drama, in the streets and in the fields. We stand unbowed before their armor, we defy their guns and shields. When we fight, provoked by their aggression, let us be inspired by life and love. For though they offer us concessions, change will not come from above. So come, brothers and sisters, for the struggle carries on. The International unites the world in a song. So comrades, come rally, for this is the time and place. The international idea